Hey y'all, I am Follygon, and in this video we are going to be looking at the creation process of my most recent character. But first, this video is sponsored by What? That fell through? What do you mean they were never going to? I haven't been uploading consistently enough this past year. I mean, come on. Well, in that case, this video is sponsored by Follygon. Check out his links below for digital sculpting tutorials, his ever-growing course, The Appeal Academy, or get some cool downloads like his custom brushes. Well, hey everyone, it's been a little while since the last one of these. Hope you all have been well. In this video, I'm going to break down my entire process on this character, talking about every little step along the way, starting off with the blockout. This is personally my favorite part of sculpting, and it also happens to be the most difficult. I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment, I guess you could say. But why are primary forms so stinking hard? Well, that's because they are your foundation, and everything you do moving forward builds on top of those shapes. You've all heard the expression, you can't polish a turd. Well, that's what your bad primary forms are. They're turds. And that is why I spend a lot of time making mine as good as I can. Not my turds, you know what, never mind. You'll hear many people talk about how you simply need to practice. And yeah, you do need to practice more, but if you are struggling and you don't know why, you're most likely not going to have a lot of fun. And that's why it's good to have a resource that can tell you exactly what you need, which just so happens to be the main focus of my course, The Appeal Academy. Check it out, there's a link below. I like to really get in here and kind of be mean to my shapes. You'll see me carve and cut up forms with sharp lines and messy clay brush strokes because I don't really care about the surface. It's just a means to an end at this point. I'm focusing on the big picture, and to get there fast, you can't worry about the little things right now. You just gotta keep pushing forward. Once I get everything in for my primary shapes, I start cleaning them up. I use what is called a subdivision and projection workflow. And if you want to learn more about that technical process, here's a free video that you can check out. Click that thing in the top right corner. It's a good one. You'll probably learn something. During this next stage, I personally like to work on my head a lot. It's a really big driving factor in your character. Obviously, it's one of, if not the main focal point, but it's also the most interesting part for me to work on. Some of that is due to the challenge of faces. They're very difficult, but most of the reason is that sculpting is a very slow process. And the quicker I can see the characters start to develop, the more excited I am to continue working on the project. Even if it's not exactly what the face will look like at the end, it's good to start finding that character early. And that was a big part of this project. It's an original character by me, and the most difficult part of this whole thing was finding that character as I continued to work. Although the hair was a lot of work as well. When I start working on hair and I don't have a direction yet, I'll just pull out a basic shape and start throwing some brushstrokes on it, seeing if I can get anything interesting to develop. For this one, I use my move brush to pull out larger forms, and my custom clay brush to build up smaller sections. I typically prefer sculpting shorter hair because it's less work, but that kind of wrecked me here because I redid this hair like 7 times, maybe more. It's one of those things that can completely change the feel of a character. I'll often talk about how small changes to a face make a big difference. Well, guess what? Hair is no different. And if you've ever gotten a new hairstyle or changed your hair color, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Quick side note, I've been watching a lot of Queer Eye recently, and Jonathan Van Ness, the hairstylist on that show, does magic with hair. And when I'm here in ZBrush working on hair, I'm gonna have to start channeling my inner Jonathan.
Yes.
Beautiful show, by the way, definitely recommend. Anyway, after getting some basic hair down and some cute bunny ears here in a moment, I continue to experiment, now by beginning to add color. If you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I like to say that color is when things start feeling alive. And it's no different here. You can make good forms even better with the right painting and texturing, and you can also make them look bad. At first, I might do a little more of the latter here, but I do redeem it later. Color should be treated like everything else. Start rough and quick, and then develop deeper from there. I throw some quick clothing on the character that I extract with a mask and then inflate, mainly just trying something at first. You can't know what works until you also try what doesn't. So I do try, and I push in one direction here, a little more soft, trying some kind of dress or blouse. But I wasn't really feeling that later as I worked on the character more, so I changed the direction, but I'll talk more about that when it comes up. One thing that really helps faces is painting your eyes, creating eyebrows, eyelashes, teeth, all that stuff. Because they're very expressive parts of your face. If you wait a really long time to make eyelashes or eyebrows, it's going to be hard to find your character's expression, or really even get your proportions right. That's how important they are and why I try to get them on pretty early in the process. I personally like hand painting my eyes. I have another video on that topic here on my YouTube channel that comes with a free download. If you'd like to check it out, there is another link in the corner again. I don't know who it was, but someone downloaded that just yesterday and donated a couple bucks for it, which was very nice of you, whoever you are. I know that's not a lot, but I love the sentiment of the gesture. Thank you. Now that I have color on my character, I can continue to work on the proportions and overall aesthetic or appeal of the character. This comes down to personal taste, of course. I know a lot of people are always in a rush to find their, quote, style, but that is something that already exists for you. You just might not know it yet. One of the best comparisons that I've heard that I really enjoyed was your art style is like your writing style. If you were in a classroom and everyone was writing a paper on the same topic, well, no two would be alike. Unless there are cheaters, of course, but there would be similarities, right? Everyone's writing about the same general thing, but the way you approach it, the way you describe it, down to the vocabulary and grammar that you use, that's all your own. And you most likely just do it naturally. That is exactly how art style works. And you can curate it. My most recent Patreon tutorial actually talks specifically on that topic and includes exercises to develop your style. So you have one. It might not be what you want, but you can work on it. And with enough time, I promise that you will get there. You guys have seen my work, so you know what I like. I love simple, clean shapes, and I will spend endless time making them as good as possible. I'm doing a lot of that right now, actually. You'll see me reassess my face many times here. I'll go back over what are called plane changes to better understand where my surface is turning. This is a technique that involves taking a rounded shape and making it almost planar. The objective being to reduce the complexity of a surface and get it, at least for me, in the exact location where I want it. I obsess over these shapes because I truly believe that they are that important, and I hope that the results speak for themselves. I don't like to spend too much time in any one place because then I start doing what's called noodling. This has nothing to do with pasta, but more so making a lot of tiny little tweaks here and there that don't really amount to anything. If you catch yourself doing that, that means it's time to move on. So I move on to the hair and continue to experiment. At the time of working on this portion of the hair, I had recently watched Arcane and I love the hairstyle of Mel.
Good.
Which, if you haven't seen, her hairstyle involves large sections of hair wrapping around the top of her head. So I decided to start going in that direction to see if I could find some more inspiration. I always say that if you can make a character beautiful without hair, then you've done a really great job, and you can think of hair as just an extra. After playing with that for a while, it's on to some simple accessories. I begin with earrings, and then move on to some kind of necklace that turns into a leather harness for pauldrons later on. I mentioned earlier about the clothing that you can't know what works unless you also try what doesn't. So I do a little more of what doesn't here. That might sound like a waste of time, but I disagree. We don't learn from always doing things correctly. We learn from our mistakes. And sometimes it takes a lot of mistakes, and that's okay. It's all about learning and moving past them. And I will move past them soon, but first, some more work on the face. Just some subtle changes to push closer to a more refined result. Making small adjustments to the lips and nose, giving the teeth some more form, now that she has what is called a mouth bag, which is such a weird term. It's a 3D thing. 3D artists are kind of weird, but it just means mouth. The more I worked on the character, the more I wanted to make her some kind of warrior. I leaned more in that direction by playing around with some armor. Shoulder armor specifically, called pauldrons. Great word, by the way. And these are created in the same way I made the clothing and the hair, masking and extracting. I did use some hard surface tools to polymodel them to clean up the flow of topology, then some Boolean operations to make them more interesting. Also, they can't just float there on her shoulders, of course, so I make some straps to hold it all down and make it more believable. At this point, I actually really like this face. I actually still like it, and the more I work on this face, the more I push away from its current aesthetic into something different. And one of the very last things I do to this character involves me bringing some of this face back in. Now we get into some of the more experimental and fun parts of this character. So I'd recently done a little arm study. Well, a big arm here, but you get the idea. Here are a few of those. I did these just for fun. I know that maybe sounds a little crazy, but I enjoy sculpting. So I took the larger one that I've been playing around with using for another character actually, which I'll show in just a moment, and I decided to try to use this with this character. I thought it would be a really cool contrast to what I was working with, and I wanted to push in a different direction. And this was definitely different. Then I also imported another sculpt I'd created recently, a Minotaur head. I thought it might be cool if she was holding it like some kind of trophy. I made this recently as well on a live stream actually. I don't do those very often, but I used one of my recent streams to play with some different shapes and ideas. And you can see how that started here and developed over time. I started to make a body for the character as well, but then scrapped that project to begin working on this one actually. And that head from earlier actually ended up coming in handy. I'll do a lot more with that soon, but next I need to rework these clothes. So she's got this giant arm now, and I want her to be more of a warrior, more active. So I want to give her clothing that would be light and easy to move in. I start working on that here, completely ditching everything I had before, minus the color. Oh, a really fun technique that I use here for the arm is to duplicate it to create some cloth wrapping around it. No reason to create something new when you already have a nice base shape there to build on top of. So I duplicate and cut the geometry into this new fabric, and then adjust it a little more from there. So things are really starting to come together at this point. The character feels cool. There are some story elements that really pique your interest. Now it's time to take all of that and push it further. I decided to start on the Minotaur head because that lacks the most work out of everything I have so far. I tend to keep things at about the same level if I can, so that some parts don't become really polished while others get left in the dust. I do this by adding some gravity to the character, quite literally in fact. She's holding onto this thing, so it's going to be affected by gravity. It's going to droop in some areas, and it needs this to come across as believable. Speaking of believability, one really difficult area to get right is anywhere that you have two things interacting. In this case, this giant hand and the horn that it's holding onto. Hands are difficult enough as is, but when you have one holding onto something, wow, does it get tough. So I do a little of that now. I say only a little because honestly, I have to return to this a couple more times later to really help sell it. Moving up the arm next to add some secondary forms, I start by getting a little messy with this, hoping for some organic happy accidents. Cleaning up and removing what doesn't work and emphasizing what does. Now that things are starting to come together, it's time to break symmetry. So everything up to this point has been symmetrical, meaning it's the same from left to right. That looks really boring, but it saves you time early on. Now I have to disable that and begin posing my character. I treat posing much like everything else. Starting rough, trying to get the basic idea down, finding something that works. I like the idea of her holding the head up like a trophy, or like she's presenting it to someone. Like, look what I did, I killed this thing. You really wanna mess with me? Yeah, didn't think so. This starts out really basic, but I develop more on it later. It was going really well. Too well, in fact, said ZBrush, and it decided to apply these changes to everything except my body. The one part that holds it all together. And technically, this was my fault because I had a part of my mesh hidden, but I'm still gonna complain about it. So I won't show it again, but I go back and meticulously readjust my body to fit with everything else. In the video here, that takes no time at all, but in real life it took much longer than I would like to remember. Either way, that's life and we're moving on. Now to her leggings. Turns out when you bend things like legs, not only do your bones move, but so do your muscles and a lot of other meaty parts of you. And that's what I'm doing here. Unfortunately, there's no button that says make things look good that I can press, so here we are trying to go back in and use what knowledge we have to do exactly that. Plus, who doesn't like sculpting a butt? As you can see, I go back to my custom clay sculpting material so that I can see better and begin the long process of refinement, working on the hips, the aforementioned butt, upper legs, knees, and all the other things that you can find here on the human body. Turns out, there's a lot. But I can't only refine the legs. I have a lot of other work ahead of me, so I do some of this to the shirt as well, making it look more stretched in the middle as I add some general texture to the surface. I actually liked how this turned out. I used my custom trim brush to rough up the surface rather quickly after getting that stretched fabric effect in, and I'll definitely have to do more with this idea in the future. I mentioned a short while ago that the head of the Minotaur needed a lot of work. For instance, I need to make the head look like it's actually being removed from a body, and that's going to take quite a while. I also need to make some fur, and well, I'm not a huge fan of sculpting fur, if I'm being honest. It's very time consuming for something that will most likely be overlooked, and that equals time best spent elsewhere. But I still want it to look decent enough, so I take my time building up the forms slowly. They do get a little repetitive, but I fix a large portion of that later on. I was particularly enjoying the fur I was making around the ears, definitely a strategy that I'm going to use more in the future. It involves pulling out a few simple shapes, then using a brush to carve in and create a general flow down the surface of the ear, weaving in and out of different shapes. I think the few scattered chunks here, paired with that idea, work pretty well. I had a lot of fun playing with the horns. I guess I was just in a texturing mood. You can see that I already have a groundwork of some of those striations going down the shape. Now I'm adding in some bumps to the surface to break up that shape even more, varying their size and placement. I do all of these by hand and then scatter just a few extra spray strokes on top to break it up further. Then I go back in for a final pass, deepening some of those striations. You can do this with any brush that carves into your surface, but I am sure that many of you are familiar with the Damien Standard brush. I use that, an orb brush, and another brush of my own creation here. I dirty up the back of the neck to get things a little more messy. I'm trying to make this thing look dead after all. And what better way to achieve that by having his eyes rolled into the back of his head. I actually love the way this turned out on my first try, just by simply hand painting what I needed. One area that was still lacking quite a lot was the arm and where I had that connected to the body. Remember earlier when I talked about areas that are interacting with each other? Well, up to this point, I just had this arm kind of stuck on the side of her, so I had to blend that in somehow. It took quite a while. I went back and forth on a lot of different techniques and ideas before I landed on what you're starting to see take shape here. I carried a lot of this form down into the rest of the arm as well. You can see I have a new color on it, and that's only because I use that to refresh my eyes. When you're working on something as time-consuming as this character, your brain eventually turns into mush. Mine does that all too often, so I change the color just to get a different perspective. It's really great to just quickly refresh your eyes. Also, I really like that elbow. That was a good elbow. More work on the body here. I need to refine and fix some of my shapes after another round of posing. I pushed on the pose more to make it feel more dynamic. It was looking a little stiff, and now I need to adjust the body because of those changes. So that means more work to the legs and hips, and then the torso as well. I really needed to fix this area a lot. It was starting to kind of all blend together into a big blob of a shape. So, much like I did with my face earlier, I reassess. I mark up my major forms with a pinch style brush, using that to make sure I know where everything is. I like to also use this for exaggeration. So where the body is more scrunched, I'll have that side be more tight, and for the other side where it's more stretched, all the hard lines will go away. I use the same technique here on the ears that I did for the Minotaur, but without making it as chunky, trying to keep it more fine. At this stage, I had actually gone back through on the hair and played with the forms a lot, and wasn't super happy with the result. So I ended up going back over everything and redoing the general texture. Kind of a pain, but it had to be done. And it also had to be done again later. 2 more times, actually. This hair was kind of just all over the place. I continue to work on the accessories. Here you can see me adding some wear and tear to the pauldrons, generally roughing up the surface and creating larger gashes where they might get hit by something. For the glove, I started with a hand I sculpted a while back, adjust the proportions, make a few changes here and there, and then add the cylindrical section onto the back to make it, well, look like a glove. Turns out it's pretty easy to make a glove if you already have a nicely sculpted hand. I wanted to add some more storytelling to the Minotaur, so I broke off one of the horns. You can see me playing with that cut section now, mainly making the surface more uneven and adding some texture. And I really like the way this one turned out. I think it looks pretty cool. Remember how I said I would return to the hand and try to make it better? Well, here I am doing that now. Sculpting is a slow process, but by jumping around a lot, keeping everything around the same level, it's almost like working on someone else's art. It's been so long since I've done anything to the hand at this point that I can very easily spot areas that need work. Either things I completely missed before, or things that I said, that's future Ben's problem too. Turns out past Ben leaves a lot of problems for me to fix. Not too nice if you ask me. Now for some rapid fire quick fixes, at least with the power of editing. I wish this is how it actually happened, but anyway. I redid the arm connection to the body, making it much more believable. I added seams to the leggings, which help show the flow of the form, and also make them more believable as well. I took a couple large sections out of one of the pauldrons to really sell that these things have seen some action. I made some cute bunny feet for the character. Those were actually a lot of fun to design. I think they turned out really cool. I pushed the expression of the face quite a lot. Although I did break a lot of things along the way, it needed to happen. And I attempted for, let's just say, a long time, to give the character a cool pattern on her face. I had this idea in my head that I thought would be super cool, and I still think it is, I just couldn't execute it in a way that I liked. But the idea was that the character would have vitiligo with the pattern of fur that you might find on a bunny's face. If you're unfamiliar with the skin condition, in short, it's characterized by patches of the skin losing their pigment, often creating some very cool or beautiful patterns. And I wanted to try to represent that here. And try I did, with more than a few different techniques. And in the end, I just couldn't make it look believable enough, so I scrapped it all together. I forget what version of the hair we are on, but at the suggestion of my fiance, I tried a shag haircut. And it actually worked. I don't think it looked bad, but I thought I could do better. The shag style felt more like it was teasing me than anything, like I had almost found what I wanted, but not quite. I added texture to the bandages around her arm, and found a cool technique by applying an alpha to what is called the snake hook brush. Sculptors out there know exactly what brush I'm talking about, and I use this on the edges of some of the fabric to give it a rough or torn-like appearance. I kind of found this technique while messing around with fur, and I thought it was cool enough to share. I made some blood. Hey, that's cool. I don't know if I've ever made blood before this time. I put that in different areas around the Minotaur's head, eyes, mouth, the gaping wound around his neck, places where blood might be, and then sculpted in a big gash on the side of his neck, just to break up that flat area. It was looking a little boring, and I wanted something a little more interesting. This kind of stuff is pretty fun and easy. Messy stuff typically is. It's making beautiful things that's hard, actually. Gross things are always much easier. Alright, enough looking at the gross. Luckily I forgot to put this seam line around the leggings so we can take a little respite. Okay. Hair take number, I lost count. But that's okay, because we finally found it, using a little default brush called the spiral brush. I've always thought of this brush as useless, and also impossible to control. But for some reason, it worked here. It took a long time and a lot of experimenting to get a technique down that actually worked with it, but I eventually figured it out. I started messy, kind of applying the same general shape everywhere, but the more I used the brush, the better I got with it. Go figure, right? The whole while finding new ways to use it and make more interesting shapes. Pulling down a form quickly can give you a completely different result compared to slowly wiggling the brush in one area. It's really hard to describe. And I'm not gonna lie, I still think this brush is not worth your time. But it did work here. Next, we are going to end with some changes to the face. There's a lot that I cut for time because this video is already pretty long, but I wanted to show you guys this part especially. I got here on the face and I wasn't happy with it. I sat on it for a few days, then came back with fresh perspective and decided that I wanted to get some of that old face back, which is why I have it all around my canvas. I'm referencing my own work from earlier, and this is not the first time I've done this. There's something about my early faces, there's this point that I often hit that I really like, and then I go and change it. Sometimes for the better, but like this, I wasn't happy. So I tried to get some of that back. Yes, I could have just reused that old face, but there's actually a lot of things I did like about what I had. So I went for something more in between. And then here, after a little time, you can see the difference between the two, As I flip back and forth on those, as you can see here, subtle changes can actually make a pretty big difference. And that is going to be where I will leave you, but not without showing you the final renders for the character. So here are a couple quick turntables of the character plus the render. And while you're checking that out, also check out the links in the description. There you can find my course, The Appeal Academy, where I will teach you everything you could ever want to know about sculpting appealing characters. A ton of new content just got added to the course, and I'm talking like over 170 videos massive. So check it out. If that is outside of your budget, I also have a Patreon where you can get monthly tutorials and access to my Discord. And then of course, for my custom brushes and other downloadable goodies, you can check out my online store at gumroad.com/Follygon. I want to thank you all for watching, especially those that watched the whole thing. Hey, congratulations, we made it through this together. It was a long one, trust me, I made it, I know. But hey, hope you guys enjoyed it, maybe learned something new, and with that, I will hopefully see you again here very soon in the next video.